world of Warcraft has been accidentally creating game-breaking nightmares for 20 years. Every expansion, every patch, every new ability launches with the best intentions, and within hours, players discover the developers missed something catastrophic. Some abilities deleted raid bosses solo, others turned entire classes into unkillable gods. That's why today I'm breaking down the 12 most broken abilities in WoW history, ranked from broken to absolutely catastrophic, starting with the one that made paladins walk up to world bosses and kill them in a single swing. Reckoning Bomb. Reckoning was either the greatest exploit in MMO history or proof that Blizzard had zero idea what they were doing in 2005. Before you roll your eyes, hear me out. This was a protection paladin talent that granted one extra melee swing every time you got critically hit, and at launch those charges stacked infinitely with no cap. Players discovered that by sitting down, which forced every incoming attack to crit, and turning off auto attack, they could stockpile hundreds or thousands of stored swings. Then they walked up to anything in the game and unleashed them all at once. On May 12, 2005, a paladin named Karmer stacked roughly 1,816 reckoning charges, walked up to Lord Kazak, a world boss designed for 40 players, and killed him in a single swing. One swing. The video went viral and became the game's first true internet moment. Blizzard issued an emergency hotfix the same day, capping Reckoning at 4 stored charges. But here's where it gets ridiculous. Even after the cap, the ability remained devastatingly broken. With Seal of Command proxying additional holy damage on each Reckoning swing, a slow two-handed weapon, and 4 stored charges, a paladin could unleash 5 attacks in a single global cooldown. That was enough to deal 5,000 to 7,000 burst damage in an era when health pools rarely exceeded 4,000. You could literally one-shot cloth wearers by walking up and right-clicking them once. The exploit became so legendary that Hearthstone's 2021 core set included a card called Reckoning with flavor text reading. He would henceforth be known as Karmer, the Doom of Kazak. Blizzard completely redesigned the talent in the TBC pre-patch, deleting the mechanic entirely. But if you think one paladin soloing a world boss was broken, wait until you hear about the class that launched so overpowered that Blizzard admitted they did it on purpose. Death Knight class. When Death Knights arrived on October 15, 2008, they weren't just overpowered. They were a walking argument that Blizzard had completely abandoned game balance. And here's the thing. Lead Systems designer Greg Ghostcrawler Street later admitted publicly that Blizzard deliberately overtuned them because raid leaders and arena teams said they didn't have room for a new class. Blizzard's solution was to make Death Knights better at literally everything. Let me explain. All 3 talent trees, Blood, Frost, and Unholy, could both tank and DPS with viable builds. Death Grip was a 30-yard ranged pull that yanked enemies to the Death Knight while interrupting casting, a mechanic with zero precedent in WoW. Anti-Magic Shell absorbed 50% of magic damage and converted it to runic power. Icebound Fortitude, Bone Shield, and Lichborn gave them layered, defensive cooldowns that made them nearly unkillable. Death Strike healed based on diseases, granting sustain no other DPS class possessed. Summoned Gargoyle Snapshot attack power on cast, meaning players stacked every buff for absurd sustained damage. The community called Death Knights raid bosses in PvP. You couldn't crowd control them, you couldn't kite them, you couldn't burst them down. They had an answer to everything. Warriors became completely obsolete overnight. Rogues got deleted because Death Knights could anti-magic shell the opener and grip them back. Casters watched helplessly as Death Grip yanked them out of position every 30 seconds. But here's where it gets insane. In the first major balance patch after launch, Blizzard actually buffed Death Knights. The class was incrementally tuned down throughout Wrath, but the definitive fix didn't come until Cataclysm, when Blood became the dedicated tank spec, and Frost/Unholy became DPS only. The Lichborn plus Death Coil self-heal combo remained a notorious PvP exploit that kept resurfacing across expansions. Even today, Death Knights remain one of the most mechanically overloaded classes, a permanent reminder of Blizzard's philosophy that new content needs to be overpowered to get adopted. But at least Death Knights required pressing buttons. The next ability was literally a slot machine where you swung once and prayed to RNG. Wind Fury Weapon. Enhancement Shamans. In vanilla WoW didn't have a rotation, they had a slot machine. Wind Fury Weapon was a weapon imbue granting a flat 20% chance on every melee hit to proc 2 extra attacks with bonus attack power. The fatal design flaw was that before patch 1.4, Wind Fury could proc off its own extra attacks, meaning each bonus swing had another 20% chance to trigger 2 more swings. Theoretically, the chain could continue until the target died. Combined with the slowest two-handed weapons available, 3.5 to 3.8 attack speed, a single lucky proc chain could delete a fully geared cloth wearer from 100% health with 1 auto attack. The community called enhancement the casino spec. You swung once and prayed to the RNG gods. When the chain hit, it was the most satisfying experience in PvP. When it didn't proc, you were a melee class with no gap closers standing in the open looking foolish. Blizzard dismantled Windfury across multiple patches because they literally couldn't figure out how to balance it. Patch 1.4 in April 2005 fixed bugs causing extra attacks beyond intended limits. Patch 1.8 introduced attack power normalization. Patch 1.11 in June 2006 cut Windfury's bonus attack power by 50%. The TBC pre-patch added a 3-second internal cooldown that prevented self-proxing entirely. But then players discovered different ranks of Windfury didn't share the internal cooldown, enabling double procs through rank stacking. Blizzard patched that in TBC proper. The Windfury era created a permanent divide in the Shaman community. Veterans who experienced the original self-proccing casino insist it was the most fun melee gameplay WoW ever had. Players who joined later call it terrible design that rewarded luck over skill. Both sides are right. Windfury was simultaneously the most exciting and most frustrating ability in vanilla WoW. But if you think proxing yourself to death was broken, wait until you hear about the mage build that required exactly one button press to delete someone from existence. Presence of Mind Pyroblast. 3 abilities, 1 macro, 1 dead player. The POM Pyro build was vanilla WoW's most efficiently lethal PvP combination, requiring exactly 1 key press to erase someone from existence. The setup stacked Presence of Mind, making the next spell instant cast, Arcane Power for plus 30% spell damage, on-you spell power trinkets, and Pyroblast, the highest single target damage spell in the game with a punishing 6-second cast time. Bound to a single macro, the mage activated trinkets, popped Arcane Power, triggered Presence of Mind, and fired an instant Pyroblast. With roughly 65% or more bonus spell damage stacked, a critical hit could one-shot any non-tank class from full health. The spell was instant. By the time the target recognized Presence of Mind activating, the Pyroblast was already in flight. Only Ice Block and Engineering Reflectors provided genuine counterplay. The 3120 Arcane Fire hybrid became the terror of battlegrounds. Famous PvP montages like Pathologist's Unknown series showcased devastating POM pyro kills from Orgrimmar rooftops and midair. If you saw a mage standing still for no apparent reason, you were probably already too close. But here's what made it truly broken. The combo required 0 sustained pressure. You pressed 1 button, and if the crit rolled in your favor, they died. No counterplay window, no reaction time, just instant deletion. Priests couldn't shield it because the shield broke, and remaining damage killed them. Warriors couldn't intercept because mages cast it from 40 yards away. The build defined competitive mage play until diminishing returns on burst cooldowns, and resilient scaling made it less reliable in TBC. Presence of Mind and Pyroblast still exist separately, but the one-shot combo is gone. The memory of seeing that Pyroblast icon and knowing you were already dead haunts PvP veterans to this day. But at least POM Pyro required stacking cooldowns and hitting a crit. The next ability let Warlocks lock you in permanent crowd control while you slowly died to doties. Fear and Death Coil. Vanilla Warlock. Fear had a design flaw so fundamental it warped PvP around a single class for years. It had no cooldown. A Warlock could chaincast Fear indefinitely, and the Fear break mechanic checked damage on a per-tick basis, meaning DOT spells almost never broke their own Fear. The result was a class that could lock enemies in permanent crowd control, while damage over time effects slowly killed them. Death Coil compounded the nightmare. This ability inflicted a 3-second Horrify effect, critically not classified as a Fear, so it didn't share diminishing returns. Berserker Rage, Will of the Forsaken, and Tremor Totem were completely useless against it. Death Coil also healed the Warlock for 300% of damage dealt. The standard kill sequence was Fear, apply DOTs, Death Coil when Fear breaks, Refear while Death Coil ticks, repeat. Here's the thing, you couldn't outplay it. Warriors would charge in, get 1 swing off, then spend 30 seconds running in random directions while Corruption, Curse of Agony, and Immolate ticked them to death. Rogues could open from stealth, land a kidney shot, and the Warlock would just Death Coil out, Fear, and the Rogue died without landing another attack. Adding Soul Link created the infamous SL/SL build that became nearly unkillable in TBC arenas. A Warlock could survive burst through Soul Link and Voidwalker sacrifice shields, fear away melee attackers, use Death Coil as an emergency button, and drain opponents with DOTs and drain life. The build was so dominant in TBC Season 2 that it defined the arena meta. The Warlock Fear Chain forced Blizzard to invent the diminishing return system system as we know it today. Fear exists in modern WoW, but with full diminishing returns, shorter PvP duration, and widespread counterplay. The era of walking in circles for 30 seconds until you died is over, but at least warlocks had to land fear repeatedly. The next ability let a naked rogue with a level 1 dagger kill a fully raid-geared warrior through sheer crowd control chaining. Preparation, stun lock. A naked rogue with a level 1 starting dagger could kill a fully raid-geared warrior in tier 2 armor. That sentence alone explains why the preparation stunlock is legendary. The technique exploited 2 key facts about vanilla WoW. Eviscerate dealt flat static damage that didn't scale with weapon damage, and preparation reset the cooldowns of nearly every rogue ability, including blind, vanish, and cold blood. The chain worked like this: cheap shot for 4 seconds, build combo points, kidney shot for 6 seconds, vanish, cheap shot again because leaving combat reset diminishing returns, blind for 10 seconds, re-stealth during blind, sap, cheap shot, preparation to reset blind and vanish, repeat. The total crowd control chain lasted roughly 45 seconds, during which the rogue dealt steady eviscerate damage that required 0 gear. Let me explain why this was so broken. The target literally could not play the game. You got stunned, blinded, sapped, stunned again, and by the time you finally got control back, you were at 20% health, and the rogue was resetting for another chain. Warriors couldn't berserker rage out because half the CC wasn't stuns. Paladins couldn't bubble because they were sapped or blinded when it came off cooldown. The technique was immortalized in the World of Warcraft video series, which demonstrated naked rogues systematically dismantling geared opponents through sheer mechanical execution. The video sparked intense forum debates about whether the stunlock represented skillful play or broken design. Blizzard eventually placed cheap shot and kidney shot on shared diminishing returns in Cataclysm and reduced the number of abilities preparation could reset. Preparation was eventually removed from the game entirely, but the legacy remains. Every time a new expansion gives rogues any form of CC reset, the forums immediately fill with posts asking, "Are we back to vanilla stunlock?" But at least the rogue stunlock required mechanical execution. The next ability let druids delete full health players in under 3 seconds through pure RNG. Convoke the Spirits. Shadowlands brought WoW's most dramatic RNG burst ability into the modern era. Convoke the Spirits channeled 16 random druid spells over 4 seconds, and those random spells included Full Moon, the highest single target nuke in the balanced druid arsenal. A balanced druid could stealth into range, pop Convoke, and if the RNG gods smiled, 100 to 0 a full health player in under 2.5 seconds. If the RNG frowned, the ability hit like a wet noodle. Welcome to the casino. The ability became a phenomenon. PvP montages flooded YouTube showing druids deleting full health players in single stun windows. Forum posts screamed about being one shot from stealth by an ability I can't even see coming. The mocking title Convoke the Spirits became a standard forum format. Here's what made it truly broken. You couldn't counterplay randomness. If Convoke rolled 3 full moons in a single channel, you died. If it rolled Moonfire and Regrowth, you survived. The outcome was completely divorced from player skill on both sides. Druids weren't outplaying opponents, they were rolling dice. PvP became a slot machine where the druid pulled the lever and either you died instantly or nothing happened. Blizzard responded with a targeted PvP hotfix on January 26, 2021, removing Full Moon and Feral Frenzy from Convoke's spell pool in PvP combat, surgically eliminating the one-shot potential while preserving the PvAE role. The ability later became a permanent talent in Dragonflight with reduced spell count and further tuning. Convoke's legacy influenced how Blizzard approaches casino abilities in PvP forever. Never again has a random output ability been allowed to roll for instant kills. The lesson Blizzard learned was that players will tolerate RNG in damage variants, but they will not tolerate RNG in binary life or death outcomes. But at least Convoke required you to channel for 4 seconds. The next ability gave warriors complete crowd control immunity while dealing massive AoE damage for 6 full seconds. Bladestorm with CC immunity. When Bladestorm arrived in patch 3.0.2, its tooltip read like a Terminator tribute. You do not feel pity or remorse or fear, and you cannot be stopped unless killed. The warrior became a whirling tornado of AoE damage immune to every crowd control effect in the game. Fears, stuns, snares, roots, disarms, polymorphs, all of it. For its full duration, a blade-storming warrior was an unstoppable force dealing massive damage to everything within melee range. The design created a nightmare for casters and healers. As one community member put it, an ability that makes them immune to fear, snares, disarm, does more damage than 3 of my doties, breaks channels, and has no movement penalty isn't balanced. The interaction with Orc warriors was particularly brutal. Orc hardiness granted 25% stun resistance in Classic and TBC. Thousands rolled Orc specifically for hardiness, and when you added Bladestorm's CC immunity on top, the result was a melee class that simply could not be controlled. You couldn't kite it because Bladestorm didn't slow movement. You couldn't stop it because all crowd control was negated. You couldn't even disarm the warrior. Your only options were run away and pray the 6 seconds expired, or pop every defensive cooldown and hope your healer could keep you alive. Blizzard's most controversial nerf came in patch 3.3.3 in March 2010, when warriors became vulnerable to disarm during the ability. The community reaction was volcanic. Warrior mains flooded the forums claiming their class was dead. The ability eventually lost most of its CC immunity in later expansions, though modern Bladestorm still grants immunity to movement impairing effects. Orc hardiness was eventually nerfed to 10% stun reduction in PvP, closing the loop on the most oppressive racial and ability combination in WoW history. But at least Bladestorm only lasted 6 seconds. The next ability gave hunters and their pets 18 seconds of complete crowd control immunity while dealing massive damage. Bestial Wrath and the Beast Within. Beast Mastery. Hunters in Burning Crusade had the simplest and most terrifying PvP rotation in the game. Press one button and become immune to everything while your giant red pet killed people for you. Bestial Wrath made the hunter's pet deal 50% more damage and become immune to all crowd control for 18 seconds. The 41-point talent The Beast Within extended that CC immunity and damage bonus to the hunter as well. For 18 seconds, both hunter and pet existed in a bubble of absolute freedom. No fear, no polymorph, no scattershot, no root, no stun, nothing worked. The pet turned red and grew visually larger, becoming the iconic big red pet that charged across battlegrounds with zero counterplay. Opponents could only kite, use terrain, or pop defensive cooldowns, and pray the 18 seconds expired before they died. Here's what made it truly broken. The hunter didn't even need to aim. The pet did all the work. You pressed Bestial Wrath, sent your pet at someone, and then just stood there auto-attacking while your opponent desperately tried to escape. Melee classes couldn't gap close because the hunter could kite freely. Casters couldn't root or slow because of the immunity. Healers couldn't peel the pet off because crowd control did nothing. The community outrage was constant throughout TBC and early Wrath. The meme that Beast Mastery was a face roll spec that anyone could play to high rating became widespread and wasn't entirely wrong. Patch 3.2.2 in September 2009 delivered the critical nerf. Duration reduced to 10 seconds. And the effect was changed to function like a PvP trinket, breaking existing CC rather than preventing all future CC. By patch 5.1, pets no longer gained CC immunity at all. Blizzard later cited this removal as proof that CC immunity on damage cooldowns was too strong, a statement that BM Hunter mains pointed to with fury when Bladestorm retained its own immunity for years. But at least Beast Mastery required you to send your pet at someone. The next ability let a single support spec stack infinitely and break the entire damage metering system, Ebon Might, and Augmentation stacking. Augmentation Evoker launched in patch 10.1.5 so catastrophically overpowered that it forced Blizzard to rebuild their combat logging infrastructure just to measure its impact. The spec's core ability, Ebon Might, buffed allies' primary stats and damage. Prescience granted critical strike to nearby allies. The fatal flaw was that these buffs stacked infinitely from multiple augmentation evokers. The exploit was demonstrated spectacularly by WoW streamer Jericho, who cleared all of Heroic Aberrus with 22 augmentation evokers and only 2 Unholy Death Knights. The 2 Death Knights, benefiting from 22 layers of stacking buffs, reached an astronomical 13 million DPS, a number that had never existed in Dragonflight and was never meant to. In Mythic Plus dungeons, bringing an augmentation became effectively mandatory, eliminating 25 other DPS specs from high-end groups. Blizzard responded within 1 week. Buff stacking was capped. A single player could only benefit from 4 of each buff type. Multiple additional rounds of nerfs followed through Season 3 and continued into the War Within. The advanced combat logging system Blizzard built specifically for augmentation remains in the game today. The spec's launch revealed fundamental issues with WoW's multiplier stacking. Unlike traditional DPS, where you either deal damage or you don't, augmentation's value scaled exponentially with other strong DPS players. A bad group made augmentation look mediocre. A coordinated group with multiple augmentation evokers made everyone's damage skyrocket beyond any reasonable tuning target. The Mythic Plus meta became toxic overnight. Groups refused non-augmentation DPS. Players who'd mained their specs for years suddenly found themselves locked out of high keys because augmentation existed, but at least augmentation required you to buff other players. The next ability let Priest seize complete control of your character and walk you off cliffs. Mind Control off cliffs. Mind Control allowed a Priest to seize complete control of an enemy player's character for up to 10 seconds in PvP. And in a game filled with precarious heights, this meant one thing: walking people off cliffs. At Eye of the Storm's floating arena, a Priest could mind control an enemy and walk them off the edge for instant death from the infinite fall. At Lumbermill, in Arathi Basin, the cliff dealt roughly 50% of the target's health in fall damage. At Dunbaldar Bridge in Alterac Valley, Priest would camp the span and systematically mind control defenders to their deaths. The ability created psychological warfare. Players approaching any cliff edge developed deep paranoia about nearby priests. The tactic required zero gear and minimal talent investment. A fresh level 60 priest was just as deadly as a fully geared one because the damage came from the environment, not the spell. In Warsong Gulch, creative priests could mind control the enemy flag carrier and walk them toward their own team. Here's what made it uniquely frustrating. You couldn't counterplay environmental death. Trinkets broke the mind control, but by the time you pressed the button, you were already falling. Engineering parachutes helped, but required split-second reaction time. The priest didn't need to outplay you mechanically. They just needed to position near a cliff and press one button. The griefing potential was enormous. Priests camped flight paths and mind-controlled players mid-landing. They hid near quest objectives on cliff edges. They mind-controlled people into lava in molten core during trash pulls, wiping entire raids. Beyond PvP griefing, mind control on NPCs revealed another layer of brokenness. Some enemy NPC abilities were vastly more powerful than player spells, and a priest controlling that mob could access their full ability kit. This interaction was exploited repeatedly to trivialize specific encounters. The ability has been progressively nerfed through duration reductions and cast time increases, but its core fantasy remains intact. Modern mind control has a longer cast time and breaks on damage more reliably, but priests can still walk people off cliffs in battlegrounds. The tactic is less effective now because players learn to avoid cliff edges when priests are nearby, but at least mind control required proximity to a cliff. The final ability on this list was a literal instant kill button that executed anyone below a health threshold, Touch of Death. When monks launched in Mists of Pandaria, Touch of Death embodied a simple, brutal premise. If you have less health than me, you die instantly. The ability dealt damage equal to the monk's maximum health to any non-player target below the monk's health threshold, and in PvP it delivered a single devastating hit scaled from the monk's stamina. Combined with Windwalker Monk's extreme mobility, roll, flying serpent kick, and transcendence teleports, the class could materialize from nowhere and execute low health targets with zero cast time and zero counterplay window. The ability was uniquely broken because its damage scaled with stamina rather than attack power, meaning a monk stacking health dealt more execute damage. In MOP's early weeks, Windwalker monks tore through world PvP and battlegrounds, teleporting into fights and instantly deleting anyone who'd taken moderate damage. Here's what made it truly frustrating. You'd be winning a fight. The monk would be at 30% health. You'd be at 70%. You're clearly ahead. Then suddenly the monk landed a few abilities. You dropped to 49%, and Touch of Death instantly deleted you from the game. The health threshold meant you could lose fights you were winning because you crossed an invisible execute line you couldn't see coming. The psychological impact was massive. Fighting a Windwalker monk meant obsessively watching your health bar and the monk's health bar simultaneously. Drop below their maximum health by even 1 point, and you risked instant death. Healers had to overheal constantly. Players popped defensive cooldowns preemptively. Blizzard progressively tightened the ability across expansions, adding stricter health thresholds, increasing cooldown times, and introducing the improved Touch of Death talent. Modern Touch of Death has a roughly 1-second registration delay before the game confirms execute range. Several classes gained explicit counters. Paladin's Blessing of Protection, Mage's Ice Block, and Rogue's Vanish all negate it. The ability has traveled the full arc from instant delete button to situational execute. Touch of Death remains in the game, but requires significantly more setup and timing than its MOP incarnation. The instant gratification of deleting someone at 51% health is gone. The monk class as a whole never quite escaped the stigma of its launch power level. Even today, Windwalker buffs are met with forum posts asking if we're returning to MOP dominance. The answer is always no, but the memory of being instantly executed from half health while winning a duel haunts players who experienced it. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.